When the NHI policy came out, I said, this is it.
I don't believe in NHI.
South Africa is not this hunky-dory, lovely place where everybody's saying, let's do everything lovely for everybody.
NHS isn't working there, so how can it work here?
At the end of the day, if you want to compare it, it's the rich that will run and say everything crap about the NHS.
What then makes NHI one of the good policies?
The only party that's got it right, if anything, is the EFF. You think I'm good enough to host my own show now?
Yeah.
My name is Sohail Essa.
Dr. Ntlanta Vilagasi.
Dr. Brendan Matthews.
This is Dr. Naseem Sharif.
And this is the Gents Clinic podcast.
Good evening and welcome back to another episode of the Gentlemen's Clinic podcast. 6 South African male medical doctors on a mission to change the way in which we perceive men's healthcare. My name is Dr. Sohail Essa, and today we have a very special guest joining us to chat about NHI politics and everything in between. I've got a bio here that I'm going to read out because
Not too much, I hope.
Yeah, just a short bio so that you guys know who we're chatting to today. Today we have in the studio Prof Shabir Moosa, who leads family medicine in Johannesburg Health District and is associate professor at the University of the Witwatersrand. He's clinically based in Soweto, supporting a community-orientated primary health care model for NHI, or National Health Insurance, which we'll be discussing today. He served as executive coordinator of the African Forum for PHC between 2019 and 2022. He was member at large on the executive committee of the World Organization of Family Doctors between 2021 and 2023. He's lead project manager for Gauteng's proof of concept in developing a contracting unit for PHC in Soweto. And that's the formal biography that we have here today. But let's find a little bit more about who Shabir Moosa is as a man. Where did you grow up? Where are you from, Prof?
Well, I born in Durban, educated in Durban at the Natal University many years ago.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm also from Durban, yeah. Nice. Where in Durban are you from?
Well, I lived most parts in Overport Sydenham. That's
Oh,
my
okay.
home.
Yeah, me too.
Is it?
Yeah, down the road there. Next to King George Hospital. You know King George?
Oh, you live that direction.
Yeah.
I was living in Sparks Road, off Sparks Road, and then somewhat in around Crescent Street. So that's my home for many years.
Okay.
Till I finished medical school.
So you schooled, you completed schooling all in Durban, moved then from KZN, you completed your studies, and then where did you move to next?
Well, I moved to Coxstead after completing my training as a doctor. I spent a little bit of time in Cape Town at Kruski and then in Madadeni Hospital in Newcastle, and then landed up in Coxstead within 6 months of completing my internship, which was just a couple of months after the ANC was unbanned. So a very momentous year for me. 1990.
So, that was 1990 when you moved to Coxstead. Yeah. Why Coxstead of all places?
Literally a toss. I think at that time it was a place where there were opportunities, by the grapevine. Go there, it's a place you can set up. But when I got there, it was, there were opportunities.
Okay.
I landed up spending there about 14 years as a private general practitioner.
Okay.
And then while I was busy there, I kind of said, let me study family medicine. And that's what I did. And that kind of led me further. So... a part of me, just to say, what drives me is that as a young student, I was extremely shy. A girl in my matric turned around and said, "You don't talk to girls. What's wrong?"
I think that is probably a turning point. It's a turning point probably for a lot of men, like wake up call.
Yeah. Well, I was shy. And then, but I was involved very strongly in the Islamic movement at the time in the MSA, and that was in from about 15, and then it was a very difficult time in our history. That's 1980s, in fact, 1979-80. And so school boycotts were a feature. It was just a few years after the 76 riots. And so I was politicized, but I went into medical school and did a lot more of the, involvement in MSA, MYM, Islamic Society, and was involved somewhat in these SRCs. So Percy Mahlati is a colleague a year or so before me. I think there were others that I'm, hark back from that time. It was a political hotbed in Natal University. I mean, everybody in non-white basically landed up as doctors there, and the brightest of the lot were there. So very much a place. Well, in medical school, I landed up being involved, but then randomly got picked out in a protest march. 1985, I think, where I got locked up for about 7 weeks, and I thought my medical schooling was gone because it was indefinite.
What year were you in medical school?
4th year. So, I mean, I still have a big gash on my head because the guy came with this, battens are really painful, by the way. They're rubber, but hard rubber. I mean, he thwacked me and it bled. But I was concussed because he just led me like a lamb into the van, and I spent, and that's where I met also some other people, like Jesus Sanoli. I think he's a prominent guy in the parliament, I think. If I'm not
the
mistaken.
speaker, the deputy speaker.
Yes, that's him. He was spent 6 weeks in jail with me in Westville, and it was actually winter, so open bars and all the winter comes in. Durban's not that cold, but you could see Durban in the distance. Not a very pleasant place to be. Fortunately, we're not sort of put in with the criminals, so kind of got to know people a bit there. And then in Kokstad, that's when I got very involved politically. Because when I got to Kokstad, Kokstad's very much a piece of Zimbabwe. Because lots of ex-Zimbabweans landed up there. And it was, in fact, a piece of the Eastern Cape that was lopped off when Transkei was formed and then became a part of KZN. But very few people were, in fact, allowed into the place. So when I got there and walked the streets, the colored community who call themselves descendants of Adam Koch, Griquas, they look at me, because they've never seen an Indian of this color. So, and I was about the 6th or 7th family that landed up there. So, it was not long before I asked the question, and Mandela is released and we have these negotiations going on. Where's the ANC? And I go into the township and I find them in a mess. People fighting over positions. So after a little bit, I said, a bit of a waste. And before you know it, I set up a civic movement. I think there was a minister, Jeff Deutsch. He was actually at the time the LAC chairman. So I don't know whether you remember or any of you know. You're probably born after that. But the LAC was the colored council that was a small committee that was an appendage to the white council. They'd come and give advice, and then the white guys would say, okay, we decide. We'll do this or that. So it was a sellout sort of role. But he was there. He said, we need to do it. And it took him a long time before he would actually get to the front of marches. And then he landed up, we did a lot of stuff there in literally 4 years, but within a few months, because of what we did, I landed up becoming elected the ANC Transkei deputy chairperson. So it's like Gauteng's deputy chair of the ANC. And it was quite a leap for me. And, I was a young guy at the time, 27 or something. And my wife, I think, was not ready. So I was on the list for Parliament, but my wife wasn't exactly okay with it. And I had a daughter of 4 at the time, and she said, "No, Dad, you're a bad dad." So I had to go and resign or get off that. But that bug still lasts. So I was involved quite a bit in strengthening the primary health care service, district health service, which was nascent, and then landed up becoming a councillor before I got to Coxstead. So maybe that gives you a little bit of who Shabir Moosa is all about.
Yeah. I thought you were going to tell us like what's your favorite food and
Well, if you want that, I can tell you.
that kind of thing. But I mean, you gave us the whole. Now at least we know you were in prison. You were ex-convict.
Lots of stuff.
No, that's great. That's great. Did you have something you wanted to ask, bro?
NHI, when we speak about NHI, it's always got political tones to it. And that's what we're going to speak about today.
Sure.
I remember we were in 5th year medical school when the 2015 Fees Must Fall movement started. I think it was within the first week. And Professor Saluji, who's the pediatric professor at Wits University, was giving us a lecture. And he's like, why is this lecture so full? In my day when a protest was happening on main campus, none of us would be in this lecture hall. You guys have changed. I never attended another lecture again until the protest finished because of how I felt.
Embarrassed.
Yeah. I was at the Fees Must Fall. However, my question is, how politicized do you think doctors should be these days? Because there's always a feeling like if you speak out about something, your head's going to be chopped off. You're going to be suspended. You're going to be fired. I mean, there's an example of the head of department at Rema Moosa who spoke out about issues there. And I'm not sure where that case is. Was he reinstated or whatever? But he, for a time, lost his job, I believe. So there's sort of that thing that we feel like the government that we fought, not me, I was in Baghdad when all of that was happening, but that people fought for, now does not give the medical profession a voice when so many doctors themselves were activists, like yourself. So to what extent do you think that doctors should play a role in speaking out against things and having actually a voice in something like NHI and its implementation, negative or positive?
Well, I think that, in my view, and I've written an article about it in a newsletter, that doctors, and I'm talking about family physicians, family doctors, by virtue of their philosophy, should be social activists, and not just be interested in social determinants of health as an outside observer. I think that it behoves them to do that. I think that if we are going to be saying, and I don't disagree with the sentiment, everyone needs to be very outspoken. This is a democracy. It protects that right. All of us who fought for that right. But I think that we need to understand that as a society, we are going through an evolution, and we have literally two sides very starkly in South Africa. It's not as nice a spectrum as we all would like to believe. In the suburbs, we can say, is there really truly inequality? But have we examined that today, South Africa remains the most unequal society on the planet? And for us to now start talking about things in a very black and white fashion becomes very, to me, problematic. So yes, to your question, let's be social activists, but educate yourself before you decide to start speaking about the quality of care will be compromised because I'm dealing with a patient in front of me and somehow NHI threatens it. And I think that is the problem. It's a suburbia view. And I mean, to be honest, in South Africa, the middle is quite mixed and grey, and everybody who's very articulate sits in that space. And I think that the truth is that there are lots of Vakramp who hold this economy back. I was there sitting in Coxstead as a councillor, and I had this great difficulty in front of me where we said, you know what, we want these white officials to, in fact, help us now that we're moving, and this is 2000s. Okay. To move and start addressing the needs of the society, of the community fully, comprehensively. They just refuse to shift. It's just lip service. And eventually we had no choice but to say, you know what, we have to get people who will be appointed, and it will have to be people who represent the society. Yes, when we did, I knew there was a problem. People were not necessarily equipped. There was a whiff of incompetency and corruption. But you're left with these stark realities. Yeah. And so today in that middle mix, please don't think that's what society is. Go into Soweto or go into Diepsloot or Ivory Park and see the degree of trouble we have. A UNICEF report came and talked about the fact that 25% of children in South Africa suffer food insecurity. Now, is that something you think about every day? You don't. Because, people hungry in South Africa, really? No, they are. And I think this is the difficulty. So please, when you speak out against things, understand that we are on a path. And the Department of Health, I think, in the ANC, and I am supportive of the ANC, I'm not necessarily supportive of the problems they're experiencing and the difficulties that they had. But to me, I don't see a government, another party that serves the purpose and does what the ANC has done. And I think it's a distance. I mean, I presented today saying, you know what, from 1994, we had UHC, a huge leap by the Mandela government implementing nurse-based care across South Africa within 5 kilometers. It took years. It took years to go there. It took 10 years for us to get a National Health Act from that 1994. Why? Because there was a whole lot of legislation, 10 years to develop what a district looks like. So understand that we have gone through it. I mean, in 1997, the ANC developed the white paper to say, there's where we're going. Read it. It speaks of the NHI. It speaks of us going down this path. So to me, this is the challenge. And I think that all of us need to understand our history, understand where we come from. I'll give you an example, and I'm sorry if I'm deviating, but it actually speaks to the question of the political stance. How many of us appreciate that the private sector was created by the Nationalist Party very deliberately? If you go back in history, the actual deregulation of medical aid schemes and allowing them to grow extensively happened in 83 from then on, because they could see we are moving towards a society that is very much more open. What is the point in it? If you ask at Netcare, where did they start? It's in the 80s, just around the corner from Johannesburg Gen. Because the idea was, let's allow private sector to grow so that privileged white people can actually access the services. And that was how it started. Access these services because, we may not control these public hospitals any longer, the specialties. And that became the pipeline. It remains the pipeline for the private sector. So I'm just cautioning, be educated, understand our history, and be more informed. So I hope that can be a conversation. You asked the question, perhaps you want to focus it better so that I don't run all over the show. I can talk for hours on anything.
I think that's why we called you here. I mean, because you're so knowledgeable with its past, present, and potentially what the future holds.
But I think let's actually practically get into the topic that we wanted to discuss today. And that is regarding NHI. So maybe you can, for obviously all the viewers that may not be familiar with the National Health Insurance Act and the bill that's been signed into legislature now, if you could just briefly tell us, what is NHI philosophically, politically, and practically?
Well, NHI actually is a small cog in the idea of what's called universal coverage, which is trying to get as many people covered with as many services as possible with as little cost to them as possible. Services and quality services. As I mentioned, in 94, there was quite a substantial leap, but it is not the quality that the South Africans expect. They want more. And in some ways, the fact that we have this inequity actually stokes up that idea that, I can get quality, but I have to pay. That's an unequal society, and it's the reason we have the instability where people want this. But so philosophically, the NHI is a step that I think, if you were to sort of term it very simply in terms of the legislation, it is basically a funding approach. So currently, money runs from our pockets to the National Treasury. And then it goes down a circuitous road through provinces, down to districts, and then to a facility. So if you go down to a facility, and it's used a budget system. So if you go to Shawelo, where I work, and you ask the manager, what is your budget? 100 million. How much do you actually control? 5,000 a month. 60,000 a year. How the heck is she going to do anything in that place if everything means paperwork? And somehow almost all the decisions are made somewhere else and she has no control over that. So yes, people can't do things, and that's the reality on the ground. And it's a bureaucracy where it's just stuck in a way which it's the ANC government that, yes, set it up, but it's the ANC government that says that's not good enough. That now says, you know what, we're going to have an NHI that's now going to set up and, in fact, send money down, right down to that facility, at least at a sub-district level, and allow them to manage the expenses there and manage the what they do. But the other thing that is different, and it's changes, is that it is now going to involve the private sector. In other words, it's saying we're not only giving to you a clinic, Shawelo, we are going to ask private providers who are willing to actually say, here's money now. We pay you also to do work for the public service in your rooms. So it's based on contracting out, what's called contracting out the private providers, and there's a range of them. But the third thing, which is really important, is that it is using a strategic purchasing, which is really about how do you purchase care, purchase services, strategically, not passively, strategically so that you can drive behaviors. So, budget systems, they don't drive anything because people get salaries. It's very simple, but it has problems with the responsiveness. The exact thing we just talked about, lots of bureaucracy. You also have on the other side in the private sector, fee-for-service. And the problem is that, yes, it's very responsive to patients, but it struggles with over-servicing. Because it's very easy, because of the inequality in knowledge between patient and doctor, that you can say, maybe let's do this, try that, maybe that, come back next month. We do want to You want services, you want people to be ill because that's money. Mm-hmm. So that's not the right incentive. Mm. It's not the right driver. So that's what is the payment system. But what is recognized globally as the better payment system is called blended per capitation. And that is basically a per capita payment to the provider. It's particularly useful for primary care. And that is possible. There are also other strategic purchasing mechanisms. So, for example, diagnostic-related groups is the other one for hospital care, so that you and that's another long story, so I don't want to go into it, but it's a way to pay for hospital care. You also can pay specialists using fee-for-service and others. But in primary care, capitation is very important. And that's really a big change for our country. It is much more responsive to patients because patients actually walk with their budget. So if I join your practice and after 6 months I say, I'm not happy, I can go to that clinic or the other doctor.
Okay.
So I'm actually walking with my budget. So that makes it much more responsive than a budget. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But capitation doesn't work only on the basis of, just that amount. It should be quite dominant, but it also involves, it has adjusters. Because patient who's a female, elderly, is very different to young male. Different patients. An elderly male with HIV, so age, gender, morbidity, socioeconomic status, these become adjusters based on data available, and there's stuff that can be done. They're factor adjustments so that you are getting paid for the patient who generally requires more care. Mm-hmm. So that is the payment system, and I think that's the three things that are markedly different. I think that when we get to trying to look at the payment system, that's the one change. You said practically how that's going to feel. Yeah. Mm. I think practically, when the contract comes out, it's going to feel like, to any provider, like a big medical scheme. Not much different. Except that patient won't come with a card. They'll come with their fingerprints. Because the expectation is that there's a health patient registry system. All of us should be on that system and registered somewhere, and will get registered. And that will be cross-referenced to the Department of Home Affairs with your prints. So you'll go to a provider who's contracted in to say, I want to join you. Okay, let's connect you to a system that speaks to the HPRS. And yes, you enroll, and that person will get paid. So payment also, I forgot to mention, is not only adjusted, it's blended. So you may get other elements eventually creeping in. In Croatia, they've got 15 different elements of payment, but capitation is the dominant one.
Prof, I just wanted to ask, I've always supported the ANC at a national level, but I struggle at a provincial and local level because the concern, and I think many people have, is the implementation. Because I'd like to think at a national level, they have serious people who sit and put these things together. They bring in, professionals, thinkers, and when they come up with their policies, because our policies and our acts are really, some of the best in the world. But the difficulty is when we see the implementation at a local level, at a district level. How do we, and because of this, I'm pro the NHI, but I'm also skeptical. I have experience in private and, of course, in the public. And if a child comes having bumped by a car in private, or let's say an adult even, he's loaded with 3 or 4 different classes of pain medication. But the same person is bumped by a car and knocked over in the township, is lucky if there's oral, medication that's there, oral Panado, and maybe an injection of Voltaren. And if you've worked in both settings, you realize that our people need equal care. We need equity. Everyone needs to be equal. We can't say that because you have money, your pain is more important than someone who doesn't have money. And that's why I'm for NHI. I want to see a level playing field. But we worry, how do we quell the fears of people who are concerned about the implementation of what you're describing?
Yeah. I think I don't agree with you that there are good policies nationally. There are lots of policies nationally, but I don't agree with them being good. I think a good policy thinks implementation through. And the fact that we've got policy upon policy upon policy speaks to policy failure. Because you're trying to force things that actually you haven't thought it through.
Yes.
That is a challenge. I'm part of the equation in terms of some discussions, and we're having a workshop next week with the National Department in Gauteng to explore. And I think that is really a key concern. You think carefully about practicalities, how it will slip and move on the ground very easily. So I think you need to appreciate that there is a fair amount of centralization in terms of the process. And based on, for example, the UK, the contracting will happen in a way, I'll give you an example of the UK. If you join the NHI or NHS, you sign off on a contract only once. After that, the negotiating body, which is embedded in the contract, that is between government and JP representatives, will negotiate and then gazette the changes. Now that means that it's not contracts willy-nilly. There's one simple contract which sets out the process. So it needs to be thought out carefully. What is that contract? Now it may also apply to other elements of the strategic purchasing. But in a way, it is going to be that the clinic, as well as that GP, will have to sign a contract to say, I am going to deliver in particular ways. And in this capitation system, it's usually equated to what the budget was, but there's going to be an incentive. Now, if it were only the public service, and I think in some ways, even Brazil has a far more dominant public service than in South Africa. We've actually got competencies in both. And the strategy that's being followed is, in fact, going to draw on these expertise, both of them. There is a lot of things that, yes, you might say that there's 3 and 4 medication given to a private person, but is that the best thing done? No, not. Yeah. That's actually inappropriate.
Yeah.
That there's nothing on the other side, that's equally inappropriate. We need to find that middle path. And I think that ultimately the opportunity with this sort of centralized contracting process, which is applicable. So, you sign a contract once and then it's gazetted, and then from there you are basically just using a fingerprint enrolling and you get paid. But you have to deliver. So that key is, what is the delivery that's required? Yes. And that clinic that is giving no medication, if they don't do that, their enrolled panel is going to say, this is crap. Because that GP group out there, they're doing better. Or I go to Dischem and I get better.
Yeah.
So this is now going to create competition. And so, if people don't do what they're supposed to do, they'll whittle away. Their budget will drop and drop and drop until they don't exist. So I don't see this anything but, if the design of the contract is good, that there's benefit all around. It's going to have to be in steps.
I think.
Can I just one question from me, Prof? I'm sure it's a bit
too early to be asking these kind of questions, but I'm sure you guys have thought about. We keep on saying capitation and money being sent to, for example, you're saying a sub-district. Who are these people that make up the sub-district? Have we thought about, are these the same managers, the same incompetent managers that we currently have? We're going to now be managing millions and millions of rands. Are we going to now start having accountants there? What's the kind of structure? Is it going to be just a medical panel where, we now deciding, for example, if you in a car accident, only Panado and Voltaren is what you understand. How are we going to place service, and how do we value service to pricing, if I may put it? Yeah.
Well, I hope I answer your question. I think that, remember that if there are going to be private providers, they're also providing care. And so that is important to understand, that it's not just the sub-district. This money may come through what's called a contracting unit of primary care, but it is actually just a payment. It's part of payment system. The money will come probably directly from the NHI fund into any provider's bank account, including whichever structure the district decides is where the account holder is going to be. So the person being accountable, the sort of accounting officer, what structure that might be. And I think that's still under debate, whether it's going to be at a district level, sub-district level, or sub-district level, because the cup is felt to be needed to be at least 300,000-400,000, and some sub-districts are huge. So I think the question you're asking is a question we've asked because, and we're busy asking that question. But ultimately, that question is going to have to come just as much as you as a group of GPs or a network of GPs or the Unjani, whatever, are going to say, does this particular funding model, the price for services, does it allow us to do whatever is necessary, not just provide service, but allow us to set up structures to coordinate it, etc., which is an equally big problem for the public service. So your question is, well, do they need accountants? I think they will. So I think that we are basically saying at the moment that each sub-district in Johannesburg, because we can't get to sub-district and there's really no capacity at all, we've said sub-districts will form functional business units. In other words, to have all the competency of any organization, and then each clinic being a cost center. But that's the public service, because we have that much of capacity. They'll have to look at that further. How do they beef it up? Are they swift on their feet in responsiveness, etc.? And I mean, they're going to be, it's competition. So they can't sit on their heels and say, let's just carry on. It's no, just carry on and spend. There's no, it's gone. Days are gone. So I think it's going to be, and I mean, people have the options. So that creates a whole different ballgame. The question you're asking about, what kind of competencies and how do we deal with that? To me, you kind of spoke of competency, but I think a lot of people also use the word corruption in that midst. Where's everybody gets the money, and it's going to be much harder. There will be money and there will be an account holder, but the government is to decide in the public service who's holding that account and what accountability systems. And believe me, there's going to be audits around that. So it's going to be much harder. Audits are there, and yes, people can bend the things. But to me, the provinces are very hidden boxes. They're black boxes. You don't know who's making decisions, and usually it's larger amounts going to. And there's a lot more decision-making happening there where contracts happen. For the clinic and the community health 7, even 100 million is going to be very difficult to try and find money. And then you'll see it in the manager suddenly walking with a Mercedes-Benz, or somebody in the community say, hi, she's doing all sorts of things at her house. It's not so easy to hide corruption when it is so decentralized. And the margins are so small in that sense, because when it comes there, a lot of it gets spent, because there's, if you look at the way you function, you have staff to pay. If you employ staff, there's no way you can take some of it and do anything with it. If you have to pay for medicines and lab, I mean, that's most of the budget wiped out. That's where most of the money goes. It's going to be very hard to make decisions there. I'm not saying there's going to be no corruption. I'm not saying that there's no difficulty around it, but I think that it's overplayed. I think there's going to be much less corruption possible on the ground. Competencies, definitely. We need to build them up.
Yeah,
with the
but no.
money.
Before I ask my question, I just want to. Naseem, Vish, do you guys have any questions or comments?
So you brought up UK, and a lot of people bring up UK when they talk about NHI and NHS, right? And then that's another argument that people make. They say, well, NHS isn't working there, so how can it work here? And even people bring up the other arguments of like every state-owned enterprise has collapsed, they say. Eskom, Sunral, the Prasa, Transnet, SAA. They'll name a long list.
For
and they'll
me-
be like,
For me, I think the NHS has worked when you see where it came from. We even in first year, we get during our orientation in family medicine a talk about the origins of primary health care and how they came out of a war and done. I think the cries in England about NHS are first world cries. It's about queues. It's about doctors
long
being
waiting
overworked.
Long waiting times.
But their system works. I don't know if I'm speaking.
No, you're spot on. I think that if you go to the UK and talk to the average person, not the well-endowed, you know, the people who the well-endowed, well-endowed in the pocket. That might even be a trick. So they would look at America and say, you know, I can get that, why not here? Which is rubbish. At the end of the day, if you want to compare it, you know, it's the rich that will run and say everything crap about the NHS. If you go to the NHS, they'll tell you there are three treasured beacons or icons in their country: royalty, BBC, and NHS. Nobody's going to let you touch them. So, yeah, you know, ask the people, not these guys who will quote Rich Oaks from there telling you the NHS is crap. And you know what, it has its challenges. And it needs to go through some lessons. But, you know, they're actually better lessons they need to learn from us. And they're learning. I mean, there was a visit to Brazil from the UK to say, can we learn what they're doing with community health workers? If you go to the UK now, there's a huge amount more of teamwork that's happening. There's a lot more of community sort of engagement that's happening. But it's a difficult shift because these guys who are GPs, their patients are so used to, I have the GP, that seeing the nurse and arranging into teams is not a very good culture shift. And the GPs themselves, you know, feel, oh, no, we've had it for so long. This is quality. And they haven't thought themselves through. In South Africa, I think there's a different equation. We've got a fair degree of competence, other cadres, nurses, including clinical associates, which have grown. And there's a teamwork that's possible that can deliver good quality of care, even though we're relatively short on doctors. But we do need doctors. And I'm saying that needs to be brought into the equation. I think you're talking about a long list, but, you know, you forget that there's an even longer list of things that work. And I think otherwise we're a broken society. And I think the problem is that we need too many newspapers and not enough journals or anything informed. And that's a problem because we literally read a media that represents the people who have the most to lose. I mean, that's the South Africa we live in.
So would this be across different levels of service? Obviously, you mentioned sub-district, district, regional, or tertiary levels. So would the competition be amongst different facilities in each level? For example, providers who are providing district care, or would it be including all the providers, obviously providing tertiary care, regional care?
It's going to eventually operate entirely across the full spectrum, but that is a long time coming.
Okay.
I take an example, which is probably where we're going to see the biggest start of it, hopefully, is going to be providers like Unjani, Alma, which are running clinics. There are guys who are running multi-partner clinics or several clinics. There are guys who are running solo GPs. There's clinics, local government, provincial government, non-GOs. All of them are going to potentially contract. And in a particular area like Soweto, and it could very well be, that's one of the key questions, is will the limitation of a person in Soweto be you can only contract with a provider in Soweto?
That area.
And it's not possible to only do that. You've already seen medical schemes. They allow you first choice and second choice in terms of your providers, even third sometimes. And we do have that as a real problem in South Africa. So your question, yes, there'll be the competition. I think competition will come up in all respects along the way. I give you an example. We basically are saying that when we get to, let's say, referrals, at the moment it will be to the public service. That's where we've crafted saying, here's a project. It will be this narrow band of GP clinic, doctor clinic or GP, whatever team. That is the sort of base of service provision based on that competency. But as we're going along, they will do referrals, and right now it's to the public service. So it'll be to the local hospital, like from Alex or Edenvale or somewhere around in that area. The GP will refer, depending on the condition, to Alex, for example, for a physio, because that's what we provide there. It's going to be then otherwise to Edenvale, and maybe sometimes on occasion, based on a protocol, to Charlotte, as an example. So I think that is the process. The idea is that as we're going along, there may be a specialist that comes in and contracts saying, instead of sending dermatology to Edenvale employed person, let's send it to me, example. So that person could be contracted to provide care. The present premise is fee for service. But I think the big problem is that these costings, including the physio and others, all this has not been very well thought out, and there's a lot of gaps in data, in difference between the public and the private costing. Yeah. This is not so in primary care. So I think the question of competition will emerge, but there has to be a pricing work done to say, listen, for this package, what price? And I think there's a lot of work needed.
And so obviously there's competition. There needs to be a pool of funds, obviously, to fund the contracting. So would this be independent of our normal public facilities? Would that pool of funds be funding contractors, or would that be all inclusive?
At the moment, what's going to happen is the NHI fund is going to include all the current public service funds that are allocated to provinces, which means all the public services will move into the NHI.
Okay.
So everyone public will begin probably to be, I think the process is going to have to be slow. You can't just boom, say everything's here and suddenly contracting. There's to be a process. And that's what we're busy trying to figure out. But in time, it will be a contract with the public service, but also contracting with private providers. The question you're asking about funds will come based on what is the package of services and what's the price point, and can this be universal? And so Treasury will probably say, well, you know what, good, you've got your act together. Here's a fund. Amount of funds that's allocated based on our current ability to shift in whatever, whether it's funds from within or outside of Department of Health or the current funds. I think to say, listen, here's money now, let's test this, or let's start here and then build on it. So as things go on, there's a model which says, try to cover as much of the population with a basic contract, make impact, rather than trying too much and not cover the full population. So there's a very important principle here to make a dent on as many people as possible, because the only way this will grow is when people have to start pulling out of their pocket to say, okay, I like this. It's really good because now I'm going to GPs and, I don't mind paying 200-300 rand a month and giving towards it. And you know what? I got my GP now, so why do I bother with the medical aid? Let me tell the medical aid, cut that bit off. I'll only need the rest. No problem. And so I think it's going to be an evolution, and the key is going to be satisfy the patient, satisfy the person in South Africa. And to be honest, in this setting, if you get the GP starting within the next 2 years, I think there'll be a lot of very happy people. And of course, if we're saying, well, keep this up and we actually will get to the specialists in the hospitals, etc. And I think it'll come. Yeah. And there's a lot of, in the pricing issue, there's a lot of questions. By having a very solid base in primary care, you can alter all the costs of the NHI. Because if I can do case management in my primary care setting, I can actually get the price of cost of care for hospitalization much reduced. If I refer properly, appropriately, it changes it. If I can get education to my community and make them healthier, I have less costs. So there's a lot of things that happen in primary care and that are very philosophical at the moment because it's chaotic. You're not even dealing with a panel. You don't know who you're treating. You just say, hello, give medicines, and out you go. So there's no incentive for you to shift the equation. And that's part of the strategic purchasing. Incentivize the way in which you do better for the system. And, we present something saying, listen, there's a cost non-hospital primary health care in the public service around 1,000 rand, and in the primary care in a capitation scheme in the private sector is 2,000 rand. That's double. But it's not so difficult to find a match point in between that amount in net amounts. Whereas if you're looking at the hospital expenditure in South Africa, it's 1,800 rand in the public service, but it's 7,000 in the same basic key care package or capitation package. That's one huge amount of money to suddenly suck up. So that, and if we do well, we start bringing that 7,000 down closer where it is very doable. So this big, hoo-ha about it'll cost 2 trillion, it's a lot of rubbish. I mean, because people are simply extrapolating, well, if I pay so much for my medical aid and it costs me, sitting in Sandton to get that, multiply by 60 million. These guys are nonsense, which is rubbish because they don't understand how care works. And you are primary care practitioners, you can make decisions that can inflate cost. Let's do an X-ray. Let's send to the specialist. I'm not terribly sure. Not let me talk to the specialist and do it here because, you know what, I don't have the time and he won't pay me. And you know what, do I educate? I haven't got time. Time's money. Let somebody else do it. I'll do a little bit just so I'm like a good family physician, good doctor. I do the thing, tick box. Don't follow a bad diet. Here's a paper's paper, So we know that we do things, and that's the big black box that economists don't understand very well.
Prof, I just want to say, I mean, really enjoying this conversation, but I think we're being very polite here because I think all of us as healthcare practitioners, and I'll speak for myself personally, is I don't believe in NHI. I don't think that practically, not on a philosophical level, I believe that every person in South Africa should have equal access to healthcare. But I think on a practical level, I think all of us are concerned. And even in this conversation, there are, I think, some elements of the discussion that we've had. I think even you have some concerns. So when Brendan said that there's a lot of great policies that we have here in South Africa, your first response was, yeah, but I disagree. I don't think there's a lot of good policies here. So my first question to you is, what then makes NHI one of the good policies if we've got so many bad policies that don't really get to that implementation phase? They're good on paper, and that's what we all agree on. Philosophically, NHI is a great idea. Why wouldn't we want everyone to have equal access to healthcare? That would be amazing. But practically, to implement it, how are we going to do that? And then secondly, I think the other concern that I have is we spoke about, it's just the rich that are complaining. And when Naseem mentioned the fact that there's many state-owned enterprises that have failed, you also mentioned, but there's a lot that have worked. But practically for the lowest socioeconomic class, their life is affected by a lot of the poor service delivery that happens in this country. If Naseem works in Hillbrow, right? And I work at Joburg Gen, and I sometimes do shifts as well at Hillbrow. If you have to drive through there, the roads are almost undrivable, apart from just litter, potholes, robots don't work. If you go to Hillbrow Healthcare Center, there's an abundance of issues in terms of times that you'll wait to see a doctor, whether you actually will even see a doctor for the day because of resource issues, staffing issues, etc., etc. There's a number. In Hillbrow, you'll have some of the highest fatalities due to violence, and that we can probably attribute to the lack of policing in our communities, even far less in the poorer communities. So we have a lack of policing, lack of adequate healthcare for already our poor. So I think I find it very hard. And I'm sure there's a lot of even poor South Africans who look at this and go, wow, they're giving me hope. We're going to have like almost private level of healthcare when the government currently runs a public healthcare system which should provide equal access for anyone who can't afford private, but currently is failing at that. And then we look at the questions Vishen asked about budget. We look at how much of the budget is actually being wasted and actually being stolen by our. I mean, in Gauteng alone, there was a scandal with our Minister of Health. Now, I know he didn't directly steal from the health budget, but I mean, if our Minister of Health is implicated in stealing money, how as a conscientious South African citizen can we look at NHI with faith and say, on paper this looks good, and I know I trust my government, they're gonna give it to me? And I think that's essentially a lot of the conversations that we had amongst each other prior to this conversation.
It's like saying like how before COVID they were saying, "Don't worry, we won't steal the money." And after COVID, they stole the money.
Listen, I'm not here to hide the fact that we have corruption and incompetence in South Africa, and I think that I don't think it's impolite to ask hard questions. I think that we have to ask ourselves: is it polite to say something's wrong without saying what you think it should be? So I'd like to turn the question right back to you. What do you think should happen?
I think number one, accountability. We start with...
And please don't speak in generalities like a politician.
No.
You know, I think you had a very... You said, let's put politeness aside, and I'm being very impolite now.
Yeah.
You need to actually speak to it very practically.
100%.
What do you do about what you're going to do?
I think
and don't talk just accountability. Tell me what exactly you mean by that.
Okay. So I'll give mine. I'm sure others also have ideas on what they'd like to. Would you like to add before I...
Yeah. I'm actually not adding to what you're saying.
add.
I just want to say, Prof, another big worry is that the public, the general, with doctors also involved, we think, I mean, why not focus on the current public healthcare system that's dysfunctional? Try as much as possible to fix that, even if it means, I mean, just doing NHI and just contracting, and sort of put all your energy into fixing what we currently have. Get it to a level where we can sort of compare the two, which, I mean, you've kind of highlighted that, I mean, how things are currently running. You can't really compare the two because it's set up so that it's you can't compare the two. That's the foundation. That's how it was set. But we all feel like that. And I'm sure you also probably think about that, Prof, that
I've got a history I told you about. I think it requires perspective shifts. And a lot of young people don't seem to have the perspective to understand where things were in 1990 and predating that. And understand the leaps that we've had. You only see an incompetent government and you think, bunch of idiots. And I think it's, I'm an eternal optimist. I'm very realist. Because to me, I shared a story right at the beginning. That we're stuck with difficulties. And as far as I'm concerned, we need to understand how we address the inequalities. And I think to simply say that the public service needs to improve. Do you know how you can do that? Because I've been in it for 20 years now. And I don't think, in fact, I was eternally excited. When the NHI policy came out, I said, this is it. I give up on trying to fix the public service, trying to address issues, because there's a huge culture problem. And I'm just waiting for it to be implemented. Because this, to me, is in fact opening the door to allow that incompetence to be whittled away. So it's a very different point of view. And I think we need to be honest about that we are protecting privilege. We come from privilege. And it's innate in us. It can't be that we don't say, but my medical aid, my case at risk. I think that we must acknowledge that all of us come from that point of privilege. To me, the question you're asking is improve accountability. I mean, we've got a very, there's no such thing as true accountability. I mean, go off to the UK, US, any of these European governments, they've rendered accountability a joke. So let's not pretend that somehow accountability is this great, some utopia. It doesn't work like that. We work in a society where vested powerful interests are at play, and that needs to be developed even in our patients to say, have power, empower them. So the question you ask, accountability, we've got parliament, we've got a constitution hailed by the world. So what more do you want? You want people to change? But I've just told you that, this country is going through an evolution. 30 years ago, you ask your mother, fathers, and ask them what their competencies and levels of education and their context were. What do you expect them to change dramatically? You live in a world that they created, we created, that you have all the opportunities, but it's not for everybody. There are still people out there who don't have what you have. And you need to be humble to know, these people out there. As I said, this is the unequalness in our society. Don't be blind to that. And cynicism comes from a lack of information, understanding about our context. And it speaks to our own privileged points of view. And I'm sorry if I'm being impolite, but you kind of opened the
No, 100%.
and I think
That's
we
why I
need
want
to be very political about it.
These are the conversations we need to be having.
This is hard nuts for everybody. I mean, this, if you look at the video and have your listeners, they'll be screaming murder if it were in, Sunday Times or the like. You can see all the racism pouring out. Go read some of that. Comments after any of these articles. I mean, South Africa is not this hunky-dory, lovely place where everybody's saying, let's do everything lovely for everybody. It's not. And we need to get real about it. And this government needs to be strong. And what we're doing in South Africa is a global trend, not unique. So the question, yes, improve the government. I've told you that, that's not so easy. Easier said than done. You're an educated person, but go and ask yourself, who's that manager up there? Who's the accountant there? Who's the HR manager? And you'll see there's serious problems. Because, and I'm not telling you, I can tell you that you may sit there and say, they put their friends and all that happened. But the truth is that, do you have the opportunity to get people who are in the private sector, as we've been growing, to come into the public service? They're on the other direction. They don't want to get there. So I think it's a whole mix of things that say we are where we are. To me, the NHI opens two doors, and I mentioned it right at the outset. One, it allows the private sector to contract and provide services. And that to me is, people, I'm not sure whether I've told you, but when I talk to young doctors, I say, is NHI privatization of the public service, or is it nationalization of the private sector? A privatization of the public service or nationalization of the private sector? They all say, no, it's nationalization. I say, no, it's actually the other way. The only party that's got it right, if anything, is the EFF. Because really, this is bringing in the private sector. Now, people see that as threatening. And it was the case when 5-10 years ago or 5-8 years ago, I presented work done with National Treasury to the Western Cape officials. And their first response was, if you give a contract like that to GPs, what will happen to our clinics? That was their first response. And they floored it. Why? Because, no, we've spent so much time building our little castle with the public service. Well, you know what? I don't think that that's sustainable. And, as soon as competition comes into play, that's going to start having to deal with it. And that's what I think the public service needs. So, yes, it's to me, your question, they're all genuine concerns, about what the needs are. But tell me something that you'll do alternatively, and don't say keep status quo, because that's not doing anything. Don't say, and I'll tell you this, don't say, no, let's get another party to do the same, let DA. Come on, guys.
Look,
where do you think, are we wanting the whites to say, let's run them? Is that our thinking here? Because as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not being racial, but I'm saying that it is a party that represents the group. And I think the truth is that it has not really brought and represents our South African demographic. And as they're going along, they're going to face exactly the same problem any party will have. Is that there is a deep thread of corruption, individualism, and capitalism in our South African society. And, sometimes people talk about Ubuntu, but you know what? That's nice to talk about. But people look after themselves because they've not had. And now there's so much. And you can see the other guy with the Lamborghini. Why can't I? And people don't begrudge them. They say, I want it too.
Why I think we should...
Look. Can I answer? Because Prof did ask me
No,
why.
no,
Realistically,
okay.
What's your-
Unless you wanted to give your
I'll
solution.
you want
after.
to offer
What's
some
your
of-
solution?
No,
go
because
for it.
Prof asked me very
give him my
politely.
solution.
No. Look, this is on a practical level how I think we can. Firstly, Nhlanhla brought it up, and he very accurately asked. People are concerned that currently the system is failing, but we want to implement a new system. So why can't we fix the current system? I'll start with a question and then I'll answer it, and maybe you'll be able to give me more of an answer. So, based on what Nhlanhla is saying, are we saying that our current system is fine and we don't need to change it, or we're saying the system is broken, let's change the system? And I'm talking specifically, I'm not talking about the comparison between government and private. I'm talking about just if we look at the government healthcare system, because technically, what we have as the government healthcare system should be for everyone. Even if you have medical aid, I can still go to a government hospital. I can still use government services. I know at Joburg Gen they may charge you a little bit to open a file and this and that, but I can still essentially have I will pay something based on my income, etc., etc. So I still have access to that. So essentially, it is nationalized healthcare. If I understand it correctly, right? Everyone technically has access to government healthcare. And so when you ask, how are we going to fix our current healthcare system? When I spoke about accountability, I mean run our healthcare system the way a business or private hospital would even run theirs. If you are a CEO of a private hospital and you don't deliver on services to your patients, or patient complaints, or doctors that are not competent enough, or like actual materials that are not being provided so that patients can get care, you're not going to be there for very long. But in our system, you can stay there for years and years in a position because, my friend is someone in government and this and that. That's what I mean when I talk about real accountability. When we're saying we're going to now pool a massive, huge amount of funds that in some way government is going to be in control of, and then we'll say, they'll audit it now, and why aren't they auditing the current system that we have now? Or why isn't that being stringently monitored? And people that are doing that, although, it's nice to say we can make excuses. People didn't have, so now I see a Lamborghini and I want it. So I'll get a Lambo, I'll get my son a Lambo, I'll get my cousin a Lambo, I'll put him in power, I'll do this, I'll do that. Those people should be punished heavily for that. We are the people that are day in, day out seeing our patients suffer in front of us because we can't give them the healthcare we want. And so to make these excuses like, but they didn't have, so now they have, and now, so we can kind of just excuse that behavior and say that that's okay. No, those people should be punished the most in our country. The people that steal, that we know it's as if they have taken from someone and that can cause someone to die. People lose their lives because we don't have the necessary services. How many times have we been on call at hospital, needed a drug, needed a service to give to a child, to save a child's life? I've had times where I've been at community healthcare centers and we didn't have oxygen. We didn't have nebulizer to give an asthmatic child. And then we hear, the next morning I open the paper and I see a story of someone who's directly involved in stealing money from our healthcare system. And how as healthcare workers, how does that make us feel? We feel like, what is our purpose even here? We're failing our people. And so when I talk about accountability, I say that is number one for me in currently in fixing our healthcare system, is that we punish those heavily as a deterrent for anyone who thinks they can steal from something that should be noble, because we can't be the only noble ones. We can't be the only ones who are taking sacrifice and trying to do the best for our patients when people who are voted and put in power sit back and we can make excuses like, oh, but they didn't have, so now it's okay that they're corrupt. I'm not saying that that's what you were suggesting, but that's kind of, some people use that as an excuse to say, oh, it's fine because things were really bad and now they're a little bit better. I'm like, but they could be exceptionally well if this didn't happen. If we really stamped this out, this really wouldn't. And I think that, apart from just accountability and running it like a business, running it like a private hospital where you set goals, you set tasks. If they're not done, you get kicked out. It doesn't matter about cronyism, about nepotism. If you happen to get that job because you knew someone in, cool, but you're going to show us that you can do the job. And if you can't do the job, sorry, goodbye, and we'll replace you with someone who's more qualified for the job. That's as simple as it is. And then I think the second thing, which is not really related to how we're going to fix this, but I think pushing the problem onto like the average South African. So, for example, we spoke about how, it's a privileged thing that we as privileged people are looking down upon, the layman or the somebody in a lower socioeconomic class, and we look at NHI as something that's taking from us and giving to them. I think for me, I can comfortably say that, I fall probably within the middle class, and I genuinely feel like it is a very difficult thing for someone who is in the middle class, and I don't think they should be blamed for having their concerns, because currently the middle class has to pay for all the services that the government doesn't deliver adequately. So, for example, in South Africa, we pay the highest for private security in the world. Why? Because our policing service doesn't work. Everyone we know, everyone sitting at this table knows someone that has been a victim of crime. Theft, either murder, some serious crime, right? So we have to have private security. So we pay for that. We work in a government hospital. Most of us have medical aid because we'd prefer to go to private, even though we work in this system and we know how bad it can be. So we pay for private medical aid. We then want to give our children the best opportunity. So we are already planning to pay for private education because our schooling systems are failing. And we would rather drop the pass mark to 33% than teach people to get 50 or 60 or 70 to be able to be competent in the world. And so now on top of that, as the middle class, you are paying taxes. Currently, the middle class generally gets the biggest burden of tax on them because the rich, they can afford to pay a little. What's 1 extra percent? It's not the end of the world. But for the middle class person who's struggling, who has to try and get a bond so he can get a home, so he can take care of his family, and he's going month to month to pay off a car. Then he has to pay for private healthcare, private insurance, all of these things. Now to ask him and say to him, pay an extra percent and don't complain because, hey, you privileged. Don't complain, you privileged, and you should care about these people when your government is blatantly saying we don't care. And I think one big sign for me to say that they don't care is 2 weeks before the elections, they say, right, we're signing this NHI bill. So here, hey, poor people, come vote for us. We're going to give you this. And to me, it genuinely feels disingenuous. It feels extremely disingenuous to say just 2 weeks before the elections, hey guys, we need your votes and we're going to give you this big promise of great healthcare. And I mean, there's even a clip I watched of an ANC minister saying you can go to any hospital. I don't know if you guys have seen this one, but he says,
Premier.
Yeah, the Premier. Yeah. Panyaza Lesufi. He said, yeah, you can go to any private hospital and you can get whatever care you want. And so it's also promising people something that may be completely impractical. If we're talking about equity, we're not saying that everyone can get private healthcare. We're saying it should be somewhere in the middle. But now we're promising the man in the street, hey, you can also get this. You can also get this. And don't worry, somebody else is going to pay for it and we'll steal a little, but don't worry, you're going to get the service. And that to me just feels completely disingenuous.
Prof, before you, I don't even know where you're going to start. But can I just ask one?
He says ending with a question.
Can I just pick a question
but
from?
He was certainly talking on the box. So, but I think if I may just respond, I think you haven't actually said what you're going to do about it, apart from one
punishment.
thing: punishment. And I think you actually. raised an issue that I think is exactly central to the NHI, which is that, have you gone to the CEO of Charlotte and actually asked her, what are your difficulties? Why can't you do what you do? What you need to.
What you need to.
And you know what she'll tell you? I got to go to province to get permission to do all
Oh,
that.
no, but your bureaucracy, I know.
Yeah.
But the difference in the NHI is not going through province anymore. It's going to give Charlotte their budget directly. That CEO knows everything, for everything.
And is watched.
So the question
personally.
is, you want accountability? I think it's going to be much more easier with the NHI because it's going to have accountability much more possible because it's contractual. The outcome is expected. I'm not saying Sankidori, everything going to work right, but it's a huge difference to the current system. And if you go to any of them, those are the constraints. You know, I'm not saying that all these CEOs are great guns, but people who are going to mess up and have good reason, because right now, part of the problem is that they're sheltered because their bodies up at the top give them excuse to say, actually, my hands are tied. You go to any of the CEOs, that's exactly what they'll tell you. So this NHI is empowering them. And the accountability is going to be even better because it's going to say, private sector, you come on board and do the same thing. So in a sense, he's going to be under double scrutiny. He's got the money and other people are going to show him how to do it. So as far as I'm concerned, your cynicism comes from a particular point of view. And I think that you say the middle class is the most taxed. That's absolute rubbish. You need to ask yourself, and this is a problem, we don't understand where tax comes from. What are the three big sources of tax? You tell me.
I don't know.
You should be.
Yeah,
because you should be careful to make such assertions as the middle class pays so much. Corporate tax, personal tax, VAT. 1/3 of that comes from VAT. That means every poor person out there is contributing. And if you look at the volumes out there, they easily are much more regressive. Amount of tax you paying out of your pocket to that government is a lot less than that poor person. He's got more vested interest. So we need to be careful to make assertions about the poor middle class. I'm not saying that I'm a middle class person, but you need to step back and look at the bigger picture. This is a lovely place, and listen, there are lots of lovely places in the world. The truth is that there are people coming back to South Africa because it's a lovely place to live in. And yes, people can bitch and moan about the roads and the security and etc. But people still come back here saying, you know what, it's better. Because when you go there, there are other problems. You may not think that this is death-defying. Go there and see what it looks like. So we need to be realistic and solution-oriented. What would you make a difference with? And it requires us to understand things better. Because as a doctor, I think you, in a way, I've been in those halls with all these people all the way. And in a sense, I think as a doctor, it's very easy to rail about, these guys are absolute idiots. I mean, you draw your information and you said it yourself. I opened the newspaper and somebody stole. Not the CEO, somebody stole. But who's writing all that in the paper? Have you looked at the way in which this media is biased? You obviously support Palestine. Do you know what the media is doing with that? So we need to understand, you know what, don't pick up the paper and make judgments. Be real. Go look around, read, understand. And then you sit and say, this is rubbish. And I've told you, just basically to your answer, that you know what, the NHI is going to solve the problems you just raised. So let's educate ourselves. I think there's a lot of misinformation. And I think there's a lot of politicking going on out there. And you say that the Premier is calling for votes. You know what? What is the other parties not doing but dissing on blackness at achieving things? And be aware that there is a thread of that. There's a strong ethno-nationalism in South Africa that's very unhappy. And we need to be very careful of that.
Prof, do you think there's a possible scenario where a lot of parties are unwilling to accept contracts just obviously based on remuneration or providers? Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a concern probably for any doctor that's now working or they're not in the state sector anymore and obviously their remuneration has obviously changed. So do you think there's a situation where people may be less willing to accept contracts in the NHI?
I think, yes, in the specialist circle, although I was quite surprised when people, seem to be quite keen, even the specialist circles, of coming along. But I think that some numbers speak to the fact of what it is that's the kinds of rates going on. So to also counter some of the issues raised, GEMS is a government scheme. It's government initiated, government appointed. That CEO has got to be connected somehow. I'm sure of it. But GEMS works.
James works.
And GEMS costs the government or the members 3 to 5% for admin fees. Do you know what Discoverers costs? Do you know? 15%. 15%. That's industry standard. So do you know how much GPs are paid when 15% of the bucks you pay for medical aid goes to an administrator whose discovery and their administration? Guess what? Tell me what you think. What do you think GPs get out of that pie?
Probably a lot less. Obviously.
Well, you know the
GPs,
question's
but-
leading you that way,
Yeah.
but tell me a number if you think a lot less. Well, let's start with the specialists. What do you think they're getting?
I think it just depends on what specialist you
No, I'm talking about the pie. The whole of South Africa. What do you
He-
think the
he-
percentage?
He's doing urology, so maybe
You're doing urology. Yeah, that's the guy. The guy with the money in his hands, So now you know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
How much?
Actually don't.
Well, okay, think of like a regular procedure that you do.
It's not procedural. It's about the total pie of spend. The Council of Medical Schemes publishes this and says, this is where money goes out of all the medical schemes. What gets dispersed?
So I think in terms of medical aid, I would say specialists probably get quite a large percentage,
What amount?
more than 50.
No, 30%.
Sure.
That's, well, you really think it's a lot. It's so lucrative, my God. That half of the 250 million goes to 30%.
30%.
And do you know how
So
much?
70%
hospital-
goes where?
No, wait. Let's go one by one. So how much goes to hospitals?
No, hospitals do take hospitals take a big
Equally 30 plus percent. Medicines. Do you know it was really the biggest cost cutter until government, this incompetent government, decided to do stuff that's seminal across the world, set pricing better. It went from 40% down to now about 20 odd percent. Half the cost of drugs in South Africa. This incompetent government, they don't know what to do. But you know what? That went down. Do you know what GPs get? And of course, the rest is all a bundle of other things. But GPs get 7%. Half of what an administrator is taking away of anybody's rand. Think about that. Every GP, any GP who is charging the medical scheme is only worth 7%. So I'll tell you now the question you ask about competition. Well, you know what? We did some work. I did some work in National Treasury that I didn't mention, that in 2018, where they asked me to create a contract testing feasibility of capitation contracting. So we designed something with an actuary and a consultant from Croatia heading their NHI system. And at that time, we went to KK and we managed to get data, and it spoke to a cost of 1,220 visits for primary care, excluding all the other kind of levels of care. Dental, etc., etc. Came to 1,220. Their visit rate was 4 visits. So each visit cost about 300 rand. That's in 2018. Do you know how much was being spent in primary care, non-hospital? The same in corrupt, problematic government. Do you know how much they were spending? 1,270 per person per year for 2 visits. So we have a problem in South Africa. This government, very rightly, has been prioritizing primary health care, and it's been growing. And it's a real lovely space because money is just going all over the show. And I can tell you there's a lot of waste in primary care. Now, the waste is I'd say, sometimes you might say it's waste. But then again, we have unemployed people and, you need to hire friends. So it kind of follows in the system. Anyway. But there's a lot of that kind of problem in the primary care. But the question you ask is that when GPs are faced with that kind of bill and they can deliver better, do you think GPs will not say, give it to me, I want to take? Now, your problem is you say, well, now what's that per visit? $300 a visit? That's rubbish, isn't it?
Too little.
Too little, exactly. Well, we did some work. I did a study in 2011 with GPs where we said, let's take a 10,000 population with an assumed rate of 3 visits per person per year. And we say, assume it's 220 visits, about a third of it chronic care, half chronic care and acute preventive care. So it was a model. And we then told them to basically price it, suggest what they would do with teamwork, and then we asked them about risks. Very interesting, still very relevant, although I need to redo that. But the first thing they did is they said, well, you know what? We would have to expand our team. Not 3 to 8, which we are doing currently, but 3 to 6, but 8 to 14, mostly nurses, to do this kind of thing, manage 120 patients with that kind of mix. So teamwork was a good response, spot on. Pricing, in 2011, they actually worked out, based on what they sort of gave on a scale of what they would charge. It landed up, even with adjustments upwards, to be 1 Rand more per person per month compared to the public service in 2011. And then in terms of when we calculated, because we actually got their visits and number of patients, we worked out their income and estimated their current expenditures. We worked out their profits and we actually did the numbers. They earn 30% more with that rate of 1 Rand more, 30% more than their fee-for-service practices. So people don't understand, and this was at 3 visits per person per year. People don't understand, this is a new terrain. Please understand it, because you need to go into it and there's a whole lot of different drivers. So there were 3 risks, and that is the difference. It's a lot more risk, but it's actually better in primary care because you manage that risk, and it risk all the way up to. But they came up with 3 risks. 1, typically government can't be trusted. Definitely. Definitely. They can't be trusted. But they said, if we have to mitigate that, we need a very strong contract. How many of you are willing to understand what that contract needs to be? And I'm shocked and surprised. I've told all the guys in all the leadership, guys, you guys need to understand the parameters in contracting in primary care and capitation. Just don't take up the offer, even sometimes doing it for free. Then we asked them, they came up with 3. We just asked one question, what are the risks? And the second risk they brought up equally so was your rate of 3 visits per person per year. And in some ways, they came up, no, it'll be 6 and 8. It only is 8 in places like France or Belgium. You know how? Only because people are not going to sit in your room 6 days, or every person sits 6 days a year. Mm-hmm. They go and visit the patients in their houses. That's how they get it that high. Mm-hmm. So it's not so easy to get such high rates. Okay. Well, we did numbers in most of the medical aids. In fact, in key care was 4 visits per person per year. In the public service, it's 2. They actually are devolving a lot to all sorts of different ways, and people don't use it as much as they should. But I did work in Shawelo where we showed that through community or in primary care, we could drive the visit rate down to 1 with much greater quality, largely because I had the resources in my hand. We could do things in a limited way. The third issue, and so the question was, in fact, the response to the mitigation was appropriate, health promotion. A few said, no, we'll limit care, only certain days, only certain slots, 2 weeks for appointments, the NHS story, which is something that has to be watched. It's a perversity, it's a problem. Then the third one they came up with, which is a third risk, was that we function in the small little 20-patient, 25-patient model, small places. You're talking about 120. That's a huge shift. Mm-hmm. And that's a paradigm shift. It's team-based, large place, all sorts of different things are going to have to happen. Their mitigation was we need to be better managers. How much of management training do you get in medical school? Not much, not at all. So anyway, very revealing. And I think the truth is that there's huge opportunity, especially in in primary care, for lucrative practice in South Africa. I think we must not underestimate that possibility.
I'm keen.
So, good. You'll be driving a Lamborghini, hey? Very soon.
I chose the right speciality.
Exactly. Well, I'm not so sure about the family physicians, because as a family physician, I think you guys think too much of yourselves. You all are too full of yourselves. But, and that's my honest truth. I'm working with colleagues, and I really don't think they got the hang of it, because they think that being better at management means they have to become managers, which is tragic. But anyway, I face my problems.
So
but,
Prof, we actually
out of time.
Yeah, we actually are out of time. But there's three very quick. I just want to ask three very quick questions that we can cover very briefly before we end, unless anybody else has
just one question for me before you even say
quick
yes.
question.
It's actually
quick
from something
answer.
that he pointed
So you
out.
think I'm good enough to host my own show now?
Yeah. About taxpayers paying more now that the bill is, or when we get NHI rolling, is that even true?
That taxpayers will pay more?
Yeah.
I really don't think so. I think that it is all a function of this evolution. NHI is not going to happen in a bang. The Premier was just doing vote catching, but I think he was trying to convey a simple idea to people. That, you know what, this is what NHI means. I mean, those people, and it was responded to that, listen, people are not blind to the fact that these are metaphorical presentations. So taking it literally is a little narrow. But that was that is the way we'll get to eventually, where, any hospital can be accessible. But I think that the steps are going to be informed by this kind of very deliberate understanding of a service package, the costs, and the way in which each can be layered on top of each other as we're going along, but knowing that we are using primary care as a base to shift the cost frameworks of the high levels of care, because we are predominantly in a fee-for-service environment, which is overserviced, and there's a lot of perversity there, which can be reversed, but it needs people to be drawn into strategic purchasing methods, which drive them to say, listen, costs. Example, you might come up and say, hang on, we are going to, instead of having specialists paid fee for service, let's get a specialist having a capitation fee or being paid by a practice to actually become a panel of their specialists to be able to cater for their population, and you get the budget to manage that. I mean, possible? Not at all difficult. It is putting the power back in the generalist to drive the costs down, going upwards. So then that's when family physicians will come to the fore, is because they can bring that kind of the skills back into primary care, where currently, within 10 years, you do nothing but, the odd CPD, you're going to forget a lot. And that's what's happening. A lot of our specialists, primary care physicians, they get paid poorly, and then they just say, what the heck, and I'll just carry on life. But I think the specialists will actually find themselves who the specialists around you. The radiologist, still no, only the urologist. Okay, well, I'd say I should have gone into the specialties 20 years ago or 40 years ago. You should have become a family physician like them. wrong bet, boy. So I'm sorry for you, but in 10, 15 years, you'll be a government employee.
For me,
well, he'll be a hospital employee.
Getting 300 rand for a circumcision.
Prof, if I sum up what you've been saying today,
I think they're still useful, guys. It's just you won't be driving a Lamborghini. He'll be driving.
It's not that NHI is this, going to be amazing, and there's chance that things will have speed bumps, hiccups here and there, and things might not work as we go. But you're saying let's give it a chance. We haven't been able to give an alternative. My alternative would be, as Jacob Zuma once said in Parliament a few years ago, when the DA was accusing him of being a dictator. He said, "You think I'm a dictator? Let me be a big dictator and you'll see how I'll fix the country." And that's because when I see the problems he is describing, I think broadly as a family physician that these health problems are influenced, like he was bringing up police and all of that, the drugs, the roads, the crime. and then red tapes within the system, you know. For example, where I work, we see over 30,000 people a year. Some of them are repeat people, you know, coming back. But the clinic is so small for the number of people we see, and they'll tell you that no, the clinic is owned by the province, the land is owned by the municipality, and now we can't expand because it needs to go through and that's why we have such a small. But if we have a dictator, we say, no, this clinic is doubling in size and no one is stopping this. All you drug dealers in this community out. No more glass bottles in our taverns. And firstly, taverns, you're closing at midnight. No one's closing at 5. You know, and people then can be punished, like the way you're saying they need to be punished. So my alternative would be dictatorship, which I don't agree in. So Julius Malema said, I think when he was finishing his ANC Youth League time, that change is painful, and it's scary to change. But you were speaking about the land and stuff. And he said that we need that change. We want that pain, and we need that pain. And I think as South Africa, we need to be willing to potentially go through that pain to, I'm going to say, hopefully reach the utopia that we want.
Listen, there's no such thing as utopia. In heaven, yes, but not here on earth. It was never planned for that. But I think dictators are dangerous, and we must avoid that.
Yeah.
There's no benevolent dictator out there. It takes short enough time before they don't. And then you struggle because you can't get them out. And I think that we only have to see what Trump will do to the world in a few months that you'll really say dictatorship don't work.
Yeah.
And I know a dictator who actually was the MEC, I forget the name, the one that created the whole fracas around the Life Esidimeni. She was a dictator.
Okay.
And you see, dictators don't do only the right thing, they do a lot of wrong things too. And I don't think it works in South Africa. We've got laws that protect everyone. And there's no place for dictators here.
But laws that also that cause things to go too slowly. I think that's what
that's not laws that do that. It's people.
Yeah.
And it's part of the problem that our society has to go through growth. You are the future, and you need to build that future. But please don't blame your parents because they didn't get it the right way for you completely. Because they had a huge hill to climb. You don't have nearly as much a hill to climb. And so be appreciative of that generation that struggled with pretty much nothing and have gone with and delivered to you lots. But I think there's more people that need delivery, and we need to think about it. So yes, I think we need to think about how we get ahead, and I don't think it's utopic. I think, as I've explained to you, it addresses your solutions. There are no other that I can see on the table. I've looked at every party's manifesto. Almost all of them are against NHI, says status quo applies. And they don't understand government, and I'm not talking about the Western Cape, because they are almost ready to secede because they think they're another country. And it has different dynamics. I mean, it is the demographics differ. The history differs. So you can't use the Western Cape to claim that we did a great job. That's rubbish. Absolute rubbish. Because if the same DA comes and runs Gauteng, or Limpopo, or they won't have the capacity. They have to use the people there, not import Western Cape leaders. So there's a different demographic. And I think if we want them to import leaders from the Western Cape, we're talking about going back to the days of apartheid. And I don't know whether you remember anything or did history lessons, but I'm sorry, I'm not willing to go there. We need to be real. And I've said, I see this NHI as bringing in the private sector much more substantially and helping to strengthen the public service in the manner of giving them the funds to do what needs to be done and to be held accountable, just like we said. So to me, NHI is coming with the right stuff. But anyway, pessimism seems to be dominant here, Shane. I'm the optimist.
So, Prof, I wanted to also say, I talk to a lot of doctors, right, in the main public, right? And we all, a lot of us are all, skeptical of NHI, right?
No, not skeptical. Heartful. Yeah, that's heartful.
Yeah, because he won't be able to drive his Lamborghini now.
Yeah, but
Why
now,
is he doing some specialty?
Yeah, urology.
And him?
No.
No.
He's working at Hillbrow
Well,
CHC.
he knows exactly the fact that the
You should
that the
see
public
his car.
service will get nowhere if you leave them to the devices.
Yeah.
If you leave them to the devices, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, but the thing is like,
all his patients.
but the thing is that as into Suhail, not you. Clown. So I say like, what I notice is that like, see, NHI would be something that would benefit us in public, right? You'd expect that guys in public would say, oh, this is amazing, we're happy for it. But most of us will still say, yeah, I don't think that's going to work. But I think that now that I'm hearing what you're saying, I understand my cynicism, where it's coming from. It's sort of better. It makes sense, right? So I actually agree now. That makes sense that it's worth trying, right? And it actually does a lot of the things, like we have clinical governance meetings at the clinic, right? And we make a lot of suggestions, but we just get
They never come to
tape.
fruition. Yeah.
no fruition. All these solutions that we have, like we can say, why don't we do this? Why don't we try that? They just say we can't, right? So I think that NHI, if we can tell the people like how we can, the doctors who might listen to this, those understand that like it fixes the bureaucracy and makes people makes accountability through that, people coming to that place.
Money drives things, eh?
Yeah. That's the interesting thing I learned here.
Well, I think we are completely out of time now. We have gone way over time.
Yeah.
And I think thank you very much,
appreciate it.
Prof
Thank you.
Musa, for
That's
being here
Thanks,
and giving us your time and sharing your insights. I think you've converted me, actually. I'm
All of
willing
us,
to give
all of us.
all of us.
And-
all of
and-
us.
and everyone's
I just
gonna
want
be
to say,
watching
I just want to say, it was just too polite. I just couldn't sit back here, listen to. I've heard people say. No, man. No, we needed
I
to have a
think this is
robust
the-
conversation. That's the only way we were
the
gonna
first
actually make this
platform.
entertaining. So thank you very much for being here and changing our minds and helping us to better understand what NHI is. And yeah, I'm willing to give it a chance. I think everybody here is willing to see how well we can implement this, and hopefully it's for the betterment of all South Africans. And I think that's I don't know what's going to happen to all the Zimbabweans in our country, but for the South Africans,
they won't go anywhere. I mean, listen, government. I mean, somebody asked me that question just yesterday. I was presenting, to a civil society forum on this, and they asked, well, if everybody's going to have their prints, what about these illegal immigrants? I said no country can ignore, from a public health point of view, residents, people in South Africa. And they have to cater to that. It's a simple public health equation. But it will not give that illegal immigrant the same quality of care that a resident in South Africa, a citizen, a user, is able to get. So it will address that problem, but not in the same way, which I think is fair.
Yeah.
of course.
Because
I think we're the first platform in the country to actually, provide the positive information. Well, at least that I've seen so far. And I think it's going to go a long way in informing the public, those that do see, even though we only get like 2,000 views.
Who told you that? What episode are you looking at? We're getting 17, 19,000 on one of our episodes.
okay,
Relax. And
nice,
I'm sure
nice.
with now the famous Prof Shabir Moosa here, we're going to get another 40,000 views on the next one. So keep liking, keep sharing, keep subscribing. Thank you very much for listening
they
to
might even
another.
dislike it too.
Yeah, maybe that too. Maybe that.
What rubbish is this professor? He's living in cloud cuckoo land.
But thank you once again, and thank you to all our viewers and listeners at home for tuning in to another episode of the Gentlemen's Clinic podcast. As usual, I'm signing out. My name is Dr. Suhail Essa.
Dr. Brendan Matthews.
Dr. Nhlanhla Vilakazi.
Naseem Sharif.
Dr. Vishay Naidu.
Prof Shabir Moosa, and it was great to be here. And thank you.